Again, I'm Congressman Ed Case, and I represent the 1st Congressional District of Hawaii, which is the area from Makapu'u Point through Honolulu all the way up to Mililani, Mauka, and then down through Ewa and Kapolei out to Ko'olina. 750,000 people live in that district, and I'm responsible for representing you in our United States House of Representatives. I'm coming to you tonight from my district office in downtown Honolulu before I head back to D.C. tomorrow for a very critical couple of weeks of legislation on many critical topics. And this is another one of my talk stories that I try to provide, where I attempt to tell you what's going on in Washington, D.C., listen to your concerns, and answer your questions. This is critical to me even in a non-COVID-19 world, critical to stay in touch. And I wish we were doing this in person. Last year, the first year of my 2-year term representing you in Congress, I did 17 of these talk stories throughout our district in person. And we did 4 this January, and then COVID-19 was upon us, and I've done a number of remote talk stories and other community meetings with you. This is my 2nd Tele-Talk story, the last one being in April. It's hard to believe that it's not even been 5 months since our first COVID-19 diagnosis in our country, but literally since then, of course, all of our lives have been turned upside down, not only in Hawaii, but our country and our world. In our country now, we've had 2.2 million of our fellow citizens diagnosed with COVID-19, and close to 120,000 of our fellow citizens lost to this dreadful disease, one of the highest per capita rates of infection and deaths in the entire world, any country in the world. In Hawaii today, 816 cases, and 17 of our fellow ohana here lost to COVID-19. From a public health perspective, we've done relatively better than the rest of the country. In fact, we have had the best public health outcome of anywhere in the country, but we've gotten there with very tough decisions by our government leaders, incredibly heroic efforts by our healthcare providers, who I can't say enough about, the folks that have been on the front lines, risking themselves, their families throughout to take care of folks, whether it be testing or caring for them. And then finally, the understanding and kokua of all of you who have taken to heart the scientific advice as to how to beat COVID-19, and we have followed the rules for the most part, and that's been critical. If we hadn't have done that, the best decisions by our leaders, the best care by our healthcare professionals would not have, prevented a much worse outcome from COVID-19 from a public health perspective. But of course, that's come at a very, very steep and difficult price. We've had the worst economic result, one of the worst in the entire country. We have, of course, virtually shut down our travel and tourism industry, our #1 industry. We've had one of the highest unemployment consequences in the entire country at hundreds of thousands, and one of the highest rates in the entire country. And so it has come at a steep price. And the question that everybody wants to answer and get right is, how do we reopen our economy, go back to our lives, go back to our work, go back to our recreation in a way that is going to be safe and mitigate the risks of COVID-19 and avoid a further outbreak that may well be worse than the first time around. So getting that balance right is an incredibly difficult balance, and we're obviously sorting through that, all of us together right now. People have different opinions on how to do that, but the bottom line is you still cannot open up in a way that risks going back into a very dark place in terms of the public health side of things, without doing even worse damage to your economy over time, much less the tragedy of losing further members of our ohana. And so those decisions are mostly made at the state and local government levels throughout our country, and I've certainly been working very, very closely with our state and local leaders and you to try to get that balance right. What I want to do tonight is focus on the federal side, the side that I can directly impact, and that is the federal emergency assistance from COVID-19 throughout our country. It started out in early March when we passed the first of 6 pieces of legislation. The first 4 were referred to collectively as the CARES Act, and that appropriated funding of somewhere in the range of $2.8 trillion to go out to a number of areas in our country, really to get through the first phase, which was just survival of a COVID-19 situation, public health and economic. There was aid there for our small businesses through the Small Business Administration's Paycheck Protection Program and Economic Injury Disaster Loans. There was aid directly to state and local governments, which was received here by Hawaii, and of course is the subject of our legislature's actions this week as to how to allocate those monies. There were direct payments to most Americans for stimulus purposes, which most Americans that were eligible for have now received, not all. And then finally, supplementation of the state unemployment benefits with a federal addition that was intended really to tide people through who were not able to keep their jobs. Also, one last item, very important, major assistance to our hospitals and healthcare providers to help them with what they needed to get through this, especially on the PPE, the personal protective equipment, which was in such a short supply in the beginning. We followed that a couple of weeks ago with the Small Business Flexibility Act, which was an effort to fix the Small Business Administration programs that were working very, very jerkily. Many people couldn't get them. People that got them weren't sure of the terms. It was a mess, to be honest with you. And that law was intended to try to fix many of those areas of disagreement and ambiguity. I think it has done pretty much the job. We have had here in Hawaii now about 24,000 of our small businesses have been able to access somewhere close to $2.5 billion of emergency assistance. And then finally, in the United States House of Representatives, a number of weeks ago, we passed the HEROES Act, what we refer to as the HEROES Act, which is a huge bill with additional assistance up in the range of $3 trillion additional that tries to allocate further emergency assistance to a whole range of needs out there. And I believe that these needs are critical, and they do need to be assisted by our federal government further, which is really the only entity that can provide this kind of aid in this kind of an emergency at this kind of breadth. The HEROES Act is currently in the United States Senate, where they are having debates over whether and if so, what parts of HEROES to pass. The discussions are ongoing between the U.S. House and U.S. Senate and the President and his administration. And I am hopeful that by the end of July, we will have a new federal emergency assistance set of programs that will come out to tide us through a further critical time as we all try to get our economies going again. Here in Hawaii, my job has been to make sure that those federal emergency assistance funds get to Hawaii, get out of the federal government through the administration to Hawaii and through Hawaii to the places where they are destined for that assistance, whether it be housing or homelessness or agricultural or some of our principal industries like tourism or to our state and local governments, a whole range of these programs. In my office, since these laws were enacted, we have tracked about 75 separate federal programs that this money is flowing through to Hawaii. Some of these are very, very large amounts, like state and local government assistance, which is about $1.25 billion. Some of them are pretty small, but they nonetheless have the same need and impact to the people that they serve. We calculate that we have seen now in Hawaii somewhere in the range of $7.5 billion of emergency assistance coming through these acts from the federal government to Hawaii, and with more money still in the pipeline, and that's before we pass the HEROES Act. The other area that I've been very focused on in working with our state and local governments, as well as our travel industry and others, is how can I assist on the federal side with what is needed to open our Hawaii safely. And I believe that basically what is needed is not magic. Number one, we're going to have to keep COVID-19 under control here to a manageable risk. And number two, people that would visit here and spend their money here in our travel and tourism industry have to feel that they are also going to be safe if they come here. And that takes, since all of the visitors, for all intents and purposes, to Hawaii come by air, one of the only places in the country that's true. What is critical is air travel, and I have believed that the post-arrival testing and quarantine of 2 weeks has not been sufficient to, number one, protect people getting on airplanes, and number two, screening them out if anybody is sick before they get on those airplanes, and number three, requiring way too many resources and a system here that is, let's be honest about it, really ignored or breached by so many folks once they get off that plane. People don't come to Hawaii on a visit knowing that they're going to sit in a hotel room for 2 weeks. That's not on their minds. And so for me, what's critical is pre-boarding testing of some kind. And I've been pursuing that with the Federal Aviation Administration, which is responsible for our nation's airspace, and also the Department of Health and Human Services, which is responsible for our nation's health, to try to get them to authorize Hawaii to impose that requirement. At the same time, I've also introduced legislation in the U.S. House of Representatives, which would mandate that the state of Hawaii have that authority. I think this is critical. I think, and we are seeing variations of this being discussed by others in our state and local government, both the governor and the lieutenant governor. The so-called Alaska model, where if somebody is able to present a very recent COVID-19 negative test when they get on the airplane, when they get off at the other end, perhaps they don't have to comply with the quarantine. That system could work as well. We could also do this in a screening of some kind, whether it be at the TSA screeners or even before people get in airports. To me, what's important is that we get it done before people get on airplanes, because I think the current system is not going to work for people to feel safe coming to Hawaii, and for us here in Hawaii to feel safe with them getting off that plane. And if we don't feel safe here with people getting off planes, we're not going to be welcoming, and that is not our style in terms of Hawaii tourism. I've also been working with our national organizations for travel and tourism, whether it be the U.S. Travel and Tourism Association, American Hotel and Lodging Association. These are our national trade organizations, and our partners in the labor unions that represent many of our employees here in our hotels and travel industry, as well as their own family, to try to come up with national solutions that will really do the job to help travel and tourism down the road. And I don't want to single out only travel and tourism, because I think that just as travel and tourism is our #1 industry and needs the help the most, and if we help travel and tourism, that will have the biggest impact on getting us back to a better place economically. But equally so, there are many other businesses, especially small businesses, that have been severely impacted, and we have to help them as well. But I'm trying to focus in the areas that I think will have the most bang for the buck in terms of getting us back as soon as possible. I want to talk about problem areas from my perspective, and there have not been, I don't think there's any surprises here. The first thing I would say is that what we've done so far is not enough, not by a long shot. It was necessary for survival. But as we've seen here in Hawaii, we are not out of the woods in any way, shape, or form yet. We have hundreds of thousands of our fellow citizens still out of work with no real prospects. Small businesses on the edge, travel and tourism having trouble recovering. The airlines having the same problem, and so that's a reality that I think we all just have to face. This is not going to magically get better tomorrow. It's going to be a long and hard haul. But I do believe that if we go through very deliberate steps of maintaining the public health gains while opening the economy in a way that doesn't jeopardize those gains, we can, in fact, come back in a very steady rate that would be very beneficial. And pending all of that, we're going to have to continue to provide aid in many areas. I believe that small business needs more help. Many of the small businesses that got federal assistance, emergency assistance, that aid is running out. And there's nothing beyond that aid for those small businesses. There's no business to start up again if there's no business here to start with. So we've got to help them get through to a minimally stable area where they can start to recover. I think we all know in spades that our unemployment benefits and payment system has been a huge issue for all of us. That is administered at the state level for both state and federal benefits. And I have been trying my utmost to work with our state unemployment office to give them every single resource they need. But that clearly is an area that is a tremendous issue for many, many of us, just in getting basic answers. The economic stimulus payments were welcomed by many, many families out there, but those are not enough. And I believe that we do have to help with further assistance in that area. And then there's a whole range of specific programs that need additional assistance. My role in all of this, I really had three roles. Number one is to try to make the best decisions that I can together with my colleagues in Congress on behalf of the country. Number two, to make sure, as I said earlier, that those laws are enacted and administered in a way that benefits our Hawaii. And then number three, and equally as important as the first two, helping you with your own individual questions and concerns. As you might imagine, in the last 3 to 4 months, my staff and I have seen an astronomical increase in the number of folks contacting our office needing help. Sometimes it's very simple help. Sometimes it's just, how do I apply for the unemployment benefits? Sometimes it's, am I eligible for the economic stimulus payment or not? Sometimes they've been very, very difficult. We had many, many of our Ohana here, for example, stranded overseas when COVID-19 broke out. So we had to work with our federal government to try to bring them home from places like Morocco and Peru and Vanuatu and the Philippines. There have been many, many different requests. Everybody has an acute need, and we're here to help you with your needs. And so the increase in contact with my office is something that I believe is our responsibility. My staff and I have been working all the time to try to answer your questions and concerns, and my office is open for you to utilize us in that way. While we're getting through COVID-19, of course, the ongoing business of Congress is continuing. Sometimes people ask me, why aren't you in session? Congress is in session. We have been working very, very hard remotely. I've had hundreds and hundreds of remote meetings with constituents. I've had 100 plus caucus calls and other calls with my own colleagues in Congress to stay in touch. And finally, Congress has also now established a procedure for voting from outside of the Capitol for those that simply cannot come back to the Capitol because they are sick or because people in their family are sick or for other critical reasons. So we're in the middle of our normal appropriations cycle. For example, I'm on the Appropriations Committee. The appropriations cycle is every year at this time. The U.S. House funds the federal government through our committee. And that's one of the principal reasons why I'm going back to D.C. tomorrow night, is to try to finish up that appropriations process. That is a COVID-19 issue as well, because that provides that level source of federal funding across the board that really establishes our foundation for digging out from the COVID-19 puka. We also have the National Defense Authorization Act, which is critical for us here in Hawaii from the perspective of maintaining a strong military and national defense and helping our economy, because let's face a reality here, and that is that our military and our national defense interest in Hawaii, besides being critical to our country and besides being a responsibility that I believe we have as a state to assist our country, has been a critical linchpin to maintaining our economy, because that has not been affected by and large by COVID-19. So we really should thank our lucky stars that in this incredible crisis, we did have one economic driver, a critical one, that has not been significantly affected, and I think we should acknowledge that to ourselves as we go down the road. In terms of resources, I want to just leave you with a few things before I move to questions. Number one, case.house.gov. case.house.gov. That's my website. And we have put up a bunch of information on COVID-19 there, resources, explanations of what I've done on COVID-19. And I ask you to go to that website and check it out and see whether that answers your questions. It also provides you with a way to access us by email or by phone. So it's a nice, easy gateway to my office. My local office here number is 808-650-6688. We were having some technical difficulties with it earlier in the evening, so if it doesn't work right now, try us again tomorrow. But the easiest way is through my website if you have access to a website. We are here to, again, assist you with your issues. We don't consider any issue, any question too small, too complicated or simple. That's my job. That's my staff's job. And so we do want to help. We're open and fully at your service. I'm going to make one more pitch before I go to your questions. I want to talk to you about the census. One of the critical areas that's going on is our every 10-year census. This is our count of not only how many live in our country, but who we are, what we are, how we live, what we need. And that is critical for us to know what kind of policies to develop for our country. It's also critical for federal funding. Many of the decisions on federal funding depend on the specifics of any state's population. And that's critical for us here, especially given our incredible diversity in so many ways. For example, how many veterans are here? For example, how many Native Hawaiians? These are all affiliated with specific federal programs. And so if we don't get that right, we lose out on a lot of federal funding. And we lose out on the government taking care of our issues when it comes to policy calls at the national government level. If you have not yet responded to the census, it's very, very easy. You can do it online. I did it myself in about 10 minutes. You can do it by phone. The old idea of the census, people coming around to neighborhoods, that's still going to happen, but obviously that's suspended now because out of public health concerns. And those census people will come when it's safe, but they'll only come to homes that have not responded yet. So if you've responded to the census already, then you don't have to, you're not going to have a census person knocking on your door, and you will help not only yourself but the rest of us and our country. So I'm going to send you to www.2020census.gov. 2020census.gov. Last report, we were doing pretty well. We're a little bit ahead, we being the 1st Congressional District and Oahu. We're a little bit ahead of the rest of the country in a response rate. Unfortunately, the other islands of Hawaii were significantly behind the rest of the country in terms of a response rate. So we all need to work together because at the end of the day, whether you're in the 1st Congressional or the 2nd Congressional doesn't matter a whole bunch. We're all one state. So with that, that's a quick report from me. Again, apologies for the issues at the beginning of the call. I hope it's working now. And I'm going to stop there, Kim, and I will start trying to answer your questions as best I can.
Thank you, Congressman. For all of you who are on the call with us, thank you so much for hanging in there and staying with us. Once again, as a reminder to ask a question, please press *3. And then first up, we're going to have A.C. Young from IAEA, who wants to ask a question about extending unemployment benefits. A.C., you are live.
Thank you so much, Congressman. I appreciate you taking the time to update us and appreciate you taking the time for my question. My question specifically, you hinted earlier at it, is going to be related to the extension, be it for the small business assistance and or the additional unemployment claims, with so many people being affected and even businesses having to make some tougher decisions as we continue on and try to adjust. I wanted to know what you and others are doing when you go back into session when it comes to extending those out based on the recommendation, whether it be Chairman Powell or anybody else, or the need here for all of us here locally. I'll take my call offline, so thank you again.
Thank you so much for that question. And it's a critical question because, as I said earlier, I believe that there are great needs beyond the federal assistance that we've already authorized, and it's already either here or on its way here. First of all, a really direct answer to your question, from the United States House of Representatives perspective, we've done all of that. We've passed the HEROES Act. We believe that that sets forth the further assistance that is needed out there. That includes both a continuation for a reasonable period of time in federal unemployment assistance, as well as at least the concept of further assistance to our small businesses. And like I said, that's in the U.S. Senate. They're debating it, but we are all negotiating it right now. Let's not forget that all of the bills that we have passed so far to deal with COVID-19 have been truly bipartisan. They have been the results of agreements between Republicans and Democrats, the House and the Senate, Congress and the President. And I really, really hope that we're able to continue that track record, because that's really what it's going to take. For us to bog down now in partisan warfare is not going to be good for anybody. And so I'm, I guess, cautiously optimistic that July will bring us some kind of a result along those lines. I do believe that there will be some additional extension, I should say, of federal unemployment supplementation. I'm not sure it's going to be at the $600 a week level. That's a matter of discussion right now, and similarly with small businesses. So, but I want to communicate one thing to you, and that is that I am acutely aware of the fiscal cliff that many families are facing, many small businesses are facing, with the prospects of federally supported assistance coming to an end. And so that's not a reality that I'm personally prepared to accept. I think there'll be a solution to that, but it unfortunately has to wend its way through a legislative process that is in fact getting bogged down by the national elections. But again, we'll personally, I'm going to keep on fighting for those particular goals.
Thank you, Congressman. Next up, we have Shanette Hoke from Honolulu. Has a question about PPE program. Shanette, you are live.
Hi. Mr.
Aloha.
Case. Aloha, thank you. It's not PPP. It's the PPE. It's PPP for small businesses. Okay. Yeah. My question is that the way it's structured now, it's still confusing. And for instance, it's not for the operating costs of the company. It's for payroll and the benefits, which is medical, dental, sick leave, and those sorts of things. Yet, we have no relief as far as the operating portion of it, meaning we have our liability insurance, workman's comp, TDI, just operating in general. So our hands are tied with just 60% for the payroll, and then the rest is for if you have mortgage or if you have a rent and those sorts of things. But is there any plans in the future to allocate the funds where we can use them for the operating, such as for all our general liability, workman's comp, TDI, in the everyday operations of the company?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And I said earlier, and I'll say it again, it was confusing. It was rolled out in a very difficult way. It was an emergency. I think good people were trying to get that funding out as soon as possible, but it was a huge challenge for a relatively small federal agency like the Small Business Administration to move out assistance to small businesses in amounts that in and of themselves, in a matter of months, were much larger than they had moved out in a decade or more previously. So it was the best vehicle we felt that was available at the time to get to small businesses as fast as possible, because There were existing lending facilities through banks and credit unions, but I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. It was a tough rollout, and there were, I think, mistakes made in terms of the limitations on that program. We also just didn't anticipate the demand on that program, although, in all honesty, perhaps we should have anticipated the consequences and provided more upfront. We funded the PPP program twice, and as I said earlier, we came back about 3 weeks ago and tried to fix the parts of the program that weren't working. For example, you talk about the limitations of the PPP program in terms of how much you could spend on payroll versus non-payroll expenses. And that was on purpose because the idea there was to try to give small businesses the resources to keep their employees on payroll, even if they didn't have the work. And the reason for that, obviously, is to keep people at work, keep them having their health care benefit and other benefits, and keep people off unemployment. So I think that the idea that we wanted that money to go to payroll was a good one, but it was too strict. It was 70-30 to start with. So, we all know that the cost of doing business in Hawaii is astronomical, especially for, leasing costs and others that are not payroll related. And so we did change that to 60-40, which is better, covers more small businesses, but it's still focused more on the payroll side. Now, there's also the other program that may work for you and for others in that situation called the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, which is also available still and still has money available. By the way, one thing I do want to say is that if there are small businesses out there that have not tried to access federal emergency assistance yet, please do it right away. The money is available, but at current law, some of the time deadlines are ticking. For example, there is not PPP available for small businesses that do not apply by June 30th. So that's not very far away. So if you've been considering the PPP, I suggest you apply as soon as possible. Information on how to do that on my website, and we are happy to answer those kinds of questions. That's what my job is, and that's what my office has been doing. So please try to tap either one of those programs, and we hope to get you the assistance that is desperately needed.
Thank you so much. Next, we're going to go to a question that was written in by Thomas Barrett. He says he's concerned about ensuring the uninterrupted flow of food and medical supplies to Hawaii. Will you consider placing a high priority on these areas?
Well, I've absolutely already. I don't have to consider it. I've been doing it for months now. The supply chain has been a huge issue for our entire country, as I think we all know, with so many of the, especially on the PPE side, so many of the PPE materials, either in finished product or in raw material, coming from overseas, from places that, frankly, I don't think we should be dependent on for this material and equipment, such as China. So it's been a macro problem for our country, and it's been a problem in the food area as well. But magnify that by us sitting out in the Pacific Ocean, 2,500 miles from the continental United States, we have our own supply chain issues. So it's been of great concern to me that we maintain a stream of food security, because we really import most of our food, and similarly with PPE. So we have spent a tremendous amount of time with our healthcare providers, with our governments, with our federal emergency management, FEMA folks, to try to guarantee that we have an adequate supply of PPE in particular. I've been more concerned, in all honesty, for the PPE supply chain than the food supply chain. The food supply chain, of course, was incredibly stretched at the beginning. It seems to be evening out. We don't seem to have, obviously there are parts of our country that have been particularly impacted. For example, meat packing plants that have caused shortages of meat. But the overall food production and supply chain appears to be working okay. But the PPE was a real issue for us here in Hawaii and continues as somewhat of an issue. And in that, we have funded a great deal of the emergency assistance was directly to ensuring adequate supplies of PPE were distributed across the country, including Hawaii. I would rank that as one of the top 10 concerns and areas of focus that my office had directed at us in the last couple of months. Much better now, but I want to remind everybody that much better means COVID-19 cases at their current level. So obviously, if we get careless about the precautions and we see a surge in the COVID-19 cases, we could well be back in the boat of having insufficient PPE on stock to handle that kind of a surge. So I completely am focused on that area.
Thank you, Congressman. Once again, to ask questions, please hit star number 3. That would be star number 3. Next up, we have Mr. David Talisman. He wants to ask about vaccines. So, David, you're live.
Hey, thanks very much. First of all, Representative Case, I want to thank you for your long-standing devotion and hard-working ethic for the people of Hawaii. Really, really is appreciated, and God bless you for that. So, thank you for that. But
thank you.
my question is right now, what does it look on the horizon for a vaccine for COVID-19? You hear a lot of different theories about it, and the president seems ambitious, but who knows what really the facts are? Do you have any intimate knowledge of this?
Well, it's obviously all in our minds because a vaccine that can be a safe vaccine that can be widely distributed is a huge part of the answer to COVID-19 over time. And so we have devoted an incredible amount of federal resources in our emergency assistance packages towards the National Institutes of Health and other folks that supervise federal R&D and who also assist private entities in trying to come up with that vaccine as soon as possible. I don't have any reason to doubt Anthony Fauci's analysis of the situation, which is that we're still some time away from a truly reliable, safe, and widely distributable vaccine. So, anybody that tells me it's going to happen in a month or two, I've had no evidence that is. Now, it's possible that somebody just comes up with a miracle in a very short period of time, but I think it's unlikely. So I think the original projection of a year and a half remains a pretty solid projection. Now, there's a lot of effort out there being devoted to shortening that time frame. There are, vaccines out there and drugs out there that are in clinical trials right now, both in our country and elsewhere around the world. We're not the only ones that have the capability to develop that vaccine, and we're not the only ones that care about it. So other countries that are friends are and sometimes not so friends are trying to get to the same place. I think what matters is that we get there. It would certainly, from a dependence on overseas entities, be preferable if we could do that in our own country and help the rest of the world, because I think we would do it with the right purposes. But I don't have any concrete intelligence that I can relate to you that would suggest anything other than what I've indicated. I can just tell you that there's just an incredible amount of money and resources being devoted to this in government and private sectors, both in our country and around the world, to get there as soon as possible.
Thank you, Congressman. Next up, we have Jean Corpus, who has a question about opening up travel for domestic and international. Jean, go ahead, you're live.
Hello. Thank you, Congressman, for holding these town halls now virtually. I've been to 3 of yours, 2 at Washington and Intermediate and also at Kalani High School. My question we've already have the inter-island travel now, and they're working on the domestic travel, trying to look at Alaska. But what is the work going on internationally? I know some of the Asian countries are already traveling with each other. They refer to it as a travel bubble. So the countries with low cases are allowing travel between them and only between those with low number of cases and deaths. So I'm thinking maybe Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan, along those lines. So they are working on that as well.
Absolutely in the mix, and thank you for coming to my prior talk stories and joining tonight. I really appreciate that. The travel bubble is a very promising approach where we would, we have had very hard-fought gains to keep Hawaii's public health consequences of COVID-19 among the best in our country and in fact world, to say that all over again. But there are other parts of our world that have also done a very good job. New Zealand has probably done the best job of anybody in the entire world. Australia, after a little bit of a shaky start, very, very good. Japan, pretty good. And you mentioned Taiwan, which has had a fantastic result by getting on top of it early, applying science to the problem, and taking some of the hard measures that we've had to take here as well. And so we have partners around the world that are safe, and they're looking to travel to places in the world that are similarly safe. And so as we can establish those relationships, we should in fact take advantage. It would be incredible, for example, if Hawaii could create a travel bubble with Japan, for example, that we felt safe about, because Japan is one of our top sources of travel and tourism. So if we could open up travel and tourism to Japan right away, that would really help in terms of recovery here. Now, the problem, of course, is that we have to do it in a way that, we know that people coming from Japan are safe, and they're also feeling that people coming back to Japan from Hawaii are safe. So back to my point earlier about we still have to make sure air travel to Hawaii is safe for that to be a possibility. Otherwise, these countries are going to go, well, if somebody from Japan goes down to Hawaii and spends a week, and they mix with somebody that came into Hawaii from, and sorry to pick on, Texas, but Texas has one of the, worst declines going on in COVID-19 right now. Well, they're not going to feel too safe about that person going back to Japan. So we're not going to be able to isolate ourselves from the rest of the country. We still have to worry about people from the rest of the country coming in to Hawaii that are safe in order for us to maintain these bubble relationships. So it's absolutely something we should pursue, but it's not going to be possible for us to just do it as Hawaii with some of these other destinations. They are still thinking about us as part of the United States.
Thank you, Congressman. Once again, it's *3 to ask your questions. Next one up we have is from Jerome Slate. He has a question about military and the health department. Jerome, you're live.
Mr. Case, given the fact that there's a large portion of our population that's military, and also regarding the Theodore Roosevelt situations, is there any coordination given between the infirmaries on the military bases and cases of the virus and the local health department, and possibly in the future of a second wave or a wave at all happening in Hawaii, of identifying hotspots and being able to control that?
First of all, an area that I definitely have been involved with over the last 3 months. And here's my straight answer. I believe that the military has been very focused on coordinating from the public health perspective with our state public health professionals. Because the military was reluctant and remains reluctant to disclose, publicly at least, the high specific details kind of, who has it and how many and what regiment and unit, some people have concluded that the military is not cooperating, and that's the farthest thing from the truth. The military actually gives a lot of information to the state so that the state can coordinate the overall COVID-19 response and coordinate back with the military and its medical facilities, whether they be, Tripler or any others throughout the Pacific. But it's a really critical question to ask because, after all, with the military presence in Hawaii, and as you pointed out, the Roosevelt, the aircraft carrier out in the Western Pacific and Guam, if the military is, running a loose ship, so to speak, on COVID-19 and is intermingling with us here in Hawaii, that's a problem. And so obviously that's been my focus. Is that the case? And I don't think that is the case. And so I think it's good, solid coordination. The military has many efforts going on. So do we. I think they stay in pretty good touch with each other.
Thank you, Congressman. Next, we're going to have Juanita Kawamoto from Honolulu. She has a question about our high-risk population and then returning to work. Juanita, thank you for waiting. You're live.
Aloha. Aloha. My question has to do with the 37,197 senior working group. And when the state of emergency was called by the governor, the number one group of people that had the highest risk were seniors. And they were asked to practice the stay at home, be safe because of the potential of COVID. But what happened was when my husband, who's 71 years old and was working for a company that felt that they didn't feel he was at risk. They felt that he should still be able to come into work. He was exposed to a lot of the public in doing what he does. And when we tried to file for unemployment, we had a very difficult time. And so is there a watch group that can assist seniors, because there's so many of them working and having to deal with this? Because they tell us we have to have a doctor's slip to even get to the point of qualification. But some of the doctors can only make reference, and we need to make reference to the fact that there's high risk because they're seniors with COVID versus major injuries or serious diseases. But it's because they should not be out in the workforce. So they held up our family since March till today. And because of the problems with unemployment and trying to get a hold of them, it was so challenging. But I have to say that unemployment the workers who are there shouldn't be to blame, because they work so hard and they have such a small staff, and they're trying to handle 200,000 people. So myself and my husband, we try to be patient, but we worry every day if we'll be able to continue to exist without any problems. So what group is out there, Congressman, that could help the seniors with a situation like this?
Well, I'm really, really sorry to hear about your situation, first of all. And Juanita, we would be happy in my office to try to help you and your husband out in your own individual case to try to get the right answers out of unemployment. Again, that's part of my job in this difficult time. Is if you're not getting answers, we can at least try to get those answers for you. And it's been a very, very difficult issue to get right, because it's very, very clear that although COVID-19 is pretty non-discriminatory. We do have, children and teenagers and 30-year-olds in perfectly good health getting and dying from COVID-19. So it's not a disease that, people are immune from automatically, but it's very, very clear that our seniors are at greater risk because they tend to have more of the risk factors of COVID-19 to start with, just functions of getting older. as well as other folks with very specific health situations where there's a high risk factor. And so I'll just, again, be very honest. I think I'm not sure we got it right. And we being collectively, all of us, I'm not singling out our federal government, because these decisions are made in terms of unemployment eligibility. They are made at the state level. The federal government doesn't have a national law that says, in this state, in all states, this is who is unemployment. So this could be done by the state of Hawaii to distinguish between different treatment of folks that are older than a specific age from an unemployment perspective, where they would not have to demonstrate that they, had the symptoms in order to leave their employment and go on to unemployment. I don't think we got that balance right collectively. And it remains an open question. But I think that what we can do here is to try to help with the specifics and see if there's another way to get assistance to you. And to answer your specific question, AARP has been a very effective national advocacy organization. They have a very effective local chapter here, and they will have answers for you, I'm sure, and we can put you in touch if you'll contact our office tomorrow. We will put you in touch with AARP, and they can help you out.
Thank you so much. Once again, it's *3 to ask a question of the Congressman. And I do have a question that came in from a caller earlier. Can you explain what your plans are to execute more federal funding for state unemployment?
Again, I would go back to the HEROES Act that we referred to, that passed out of the U.S. House about 4 weeks ago. I voted for it, and that particular bill was really a doubling of the emergency assistance across a whole number of areas, one of which was to extend the federal unemployment supplemental benefits. So most unemployment benefits are authorized, administered, and paid for by states. So the feds don't really get involved in it all that much. What we did in this situation was to say, we're gonna add on, because we think the need is so critical across the country for the crisis. We're going to add on to unemployment, and so that is what is coming to an end soon. Is that additional up to $600 a week for folks, and that's been a critical part of the stability in not stability but survival in many families, many ohana, that have had to get through these rough times, and I don't want that to end. So the HEROES Act says we're going to extend it to try to help people out. Now, the other thing the HEROES Act does that I think is also really important to mention is that it would provide further assistance to state and local governments. One of the main areas of the HEROES Act, of the CARES Act, was to authorize a lot of money to states across the country and to county and local governments that they could use at their discretion, because every state, every county is a little different. And here in Hawaii, about $1.25 billion came to our state and local governments here. They could, and in fact are, as we speak, discussing, they being our state legislature and governor, whether to allocate some of that money to supplementing state unemployment. And in the HEROES Act that we passed, we provided for a substantial amount of additional funding to our state and local governments. As it translates here in Hawaii, it would be in the billions of dollars of additional funding. And I would fully expect, I'm not the direct decision maker on how the state and local governments spend that, because I'm not in state and local government. But I would certainly think that assuring that people who are legitimately unemployed, who cannot go back to a job or find another job, do continue to be covered by unemployment while we try to recover this economy so that those jobs again exist.
Thank you so much, Congressman. We have Jennifer, who called in earlier, and she had a question about housing assistance. if your lender is a private lender, what kind of assistance or where can you go for assistance if you can't get a hold of your lender?
So there is federal assistance. Well, I should say two things. I guess I'm a little, I don't know if Jennifer's still on the line or anywhere accessible, but the first thing that kind of puzzles me in all honesty is why her lender will not, talk with her, because to me, that's really inexcusable for any lender to not talk with the lender's, borrowers in a time of need. And so for Jennifer, the first thing I would say to you is, and we've done this with other constituents as well, it's not unusual. If you're not getting an answer from your lender, we'll ask for you. And usually lenders will answer the congressman's office. That's a little bit sarcastic. They do answer my office, and we're happy to make that. That's something that I routinely do. I try to get people answers. So that's number one. Number two, if the question from Jennifer is about trying to figure out how to adjust the mortgage, perhaps I think that's what she's saying, or a loan. Many of our lenders, including many of our Kama'aina ones here, are definitely discussing alternative agreements with their borrowers to help the borrowers get through a really tough time. And there are federal programs out there that provide restrictions on what lenders can do during the crisis, especially for federally backed mortgages and federally backed housing projects. So I don't know if she fits into that category, but we can find that out. So those are three areas that come to the top of my mind while I listen to the question. But bottom line, if you can call our office, we'll try to help you out with your own individual questions.
Thank you, Congressman. Next person we have up is Philip Blackman. He has a question about long-term care facilities during this COVID pandemic. Philip, you're live.
Thank you, Congressman Case. Appreciate the straightforward, honest, and forthright way you're reaching out to us and allowing us to ask questions. There's several statistics that got into the news media, but it seemed to take that they could have been with greater clarity. For example, it seemed it took quite a while before it became the national consciousness of the high percentage of deaths were 40% in care facilities, long-term care facilities, and that the distinction between the various groupings weren't all under the same jurisdiction to gather that information. And an earlier caller indicated that some of the military statistics wouldn't be involved. So the transparency and visibility of some of these late analysis of statistics may have been beneficial to have well understood by the public to reduce their anxiety and for the policy and healthcare workers to do their job better.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. First of all, just to make sure I communicated the point about the military earlier, the military does give the details to the state so that the state and the military are kind of on the same page about what's happening from a COVID-19 perspective to include the military. What the military has been reluctant to do is to get down to a level of detail where they feel, and I think it's a reasonable concern that our adversaries and potential adversaries would start analyzing where our force was weak. As long as, from my perspective, as long as our public health officials know what that information is and can adjust for it from a public health perspective, I'm willing to cut the military some slack to not share the real detail as it has been the case for other parts of our communities. The long-term care facilities, of course, that's where the COVID-19 started in our country, and in all honesty, again, that's where so much of the problem has been from a national perspective. By definition, long-term care facilities have all of the vectors of substantial COVID-19 infection and death, from communal living to frequent visitation to high-intensity interaction with staff to to folks that almost by definition have conditions that leave them at a lot higher risk from COVID-19. And so the long-term care facilities across our country have been of incredible concern to the Centers for Disease Prevention and Control, for example, the CDC. To some extent, we haven't here in Hawaii seen that or thought about it too much, because I think that on balance, our long-term care facilities did a real good job of taking the kind of preventive measures that needed to be taken. And so it's only been relatively recently that we've seen that real uptick in our long-term care facilities, which is a real concern, because the last thing we want is for COVID-19 to get into our long-term care facilities here. I'm pretty confident, though, that the actual statistics of what's happening in the long-term care facilities are part of the reporting that is being communicated to our state public health officials. So I don't think that they're lacking, for information. But it certainly is a concern, and I know that the state public health folks have been very, very much focused on long-term care facilities and making sure that COVID-19 didn't get a grip on them.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Next, we're going to go to Imelda Ancheta from Waipahu. She has a question about the stimulus checks. Imelda, you are live.
Congressman, good evening. My question
Good evening.
is, you mentioned before that the stimulus money is coming in June, whereas in the news we heard that it will be coming in a form of card, Visa card, and don't throw away, they said. Until now, we haven't received that, which you said, Congressman, that it's already here in Hawaii. I mean, the funds is already here in Hawaii. So where is it now?
Okay, Imelda, this is something that we should, again, if you contact my office tomorrow, we can get into the specifics with you of your own situation, because I want to make sure that what the exact information is that you we want to make sure that you're eligible. First of all, some people that think they're eligible are not for various reasons, and some people that are eligible have not gotten their checks yet. So not all the checks are out yet. The payments, I should say, are out yet. When I said earlier that the money is already here in Hawaii, what I meant by that was that many, if not most, of the folks in Hawaii who are eligible for the stimulus payments have received their payments, whether it be a direct deposit into their banking account, if for example, they file their tax returns with a direct deposit with their bank. Those folks got their checks pretty fast, or Social Security beneficiaries who we fought hard to make sure they could also get their checks based on Social Security information, or our veterans so that they could get their checks based on the veterans benefits information. So we're kind of down to the the payments are still being made, but some people definitely haven't gotten them yet. And again, Imelda, again, to be honest, sometimes I can't explain why somebody that actually does have a direct account with a bank hasn't gotten his or her check, whereas somebody with kind of a less easy way of getting paid has. The prepaid kind of credit card style of payment was tried out, and I think I believe that they have done that, but not continued it of late. I'm going to ask one of my staff to check as we're on the phone here as to whether those cards are still going out. My impression is no. But here's the bottom line. If you call us tomorrow, we'll try to get the answer for you on your own specific situation.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Next up, we have Marcia Anderson. She has a question about the HEROES Act. Marcia, you are live.
Aloha, Representative Case. Thank you for hosting the forum tonight.
Aloha.
My question briefly, what are the major sticking points between the House and Senate of the HEROES Act, And is there anything in it that doesn't pertain to COVID-related support?
So the major sticking points, as far as I understand them, and I shouldn't say just House and Senate, because generalizing, the Democrats in the Senate are supportive of the HEROES Act, and so it's a disagreement inside the United States Senate right now. The areas of disagreement, as I understand them, and I don't have tremendous insight on it. I just have discussed it at great length with my colleagues on conference calls and other sources. The majority in the Senate has been reluctant to provide further assistance to state and local governments. The belief there has been that I've heard it stated by some senators that they believe that state and local governments were not running their revenues correctly to start with, so this is just a bailout of state and local governments that aren't doing a good job to start with. My own approach to that is, well, everybody's in the same boat right now. Whatever they did previously, every single state and local government in our entire country is in a crisis mode, and they deserve that assistance. There are other provisions in that bill that some people in the Senate, disagree with. They may not feel that a particular program should get emergency assistance. But in my mind, at this point, what's in the HEROES Act is related to COVID-19. As we assist folks across the country with specific programs and other requirements to deal with COVID-19. Some of that is a very, very direct benefit and assistance to COVID-19 causes. But at the end of the day, COVID-19 is still both a public health crisis and an economic crisis. So as we can help the country through a survival mode and into a stability mode, from my perspective, that's COVID-19.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Dr. Michael Zafrani from IAEA. He has a question about antibody testing. Dr. Zafrani, you are live.
Yeah, hi. Actually, it's antigen testing. And the reason I'm questioning is that, I'm understanding that the Department of Health only does antigen testing if you have symptoms. Our antigen tests now are so specific. They're 98.6% specific and 94.7% sensitive. So, why aren't we testing healthy people? Why aren't we testing to eliminate the asymptomatic person that's going around and infecting everybody? We have a company here called Abbott Labs in the United States that makes a 20-minute test that's extremely sensitive and specific. So my question is, why aren't we using it? Spend some of our money to get rid of this COVID instead of closing down our economy. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Doctor. First of all, you're a doctor and I'm not, so I'm not gonna. I have no reason to doubt your medical analysis. What I will say is that I completely agree with you on the basic principle of your question, which is that widespread testing, widespread, readily available, quick testing is one of the major answers, along with vaccines and contact tracing, to trying to provide some level of stability in the public health side of COVID-19 to allow us to do what you note and what I certainly want, which is to open as fast as we possibly can without re-jeopardizing public health. So, my answer to you directly is I agree we should be expanding the antigen testing beyond people that are indicating symptomatic. I agree that the Abbott Labs rapid test is incredibly valuable, and we should try to expand that as fast as we can, not just with Abbott, but with other people in production in the world. And I completely agree with you that the goal at the end of the day is not just is to test so widely that we cast a much wider net than what we are doing right now. I think the honest answer to your question is that as we got into the real heat of the crisis of COVID-19, we had so limited production of Abbott Lab style testing that we just overwhelmed the supply chain of that material, and the critical path there was to identify if people with symptoms actually did have it or didn't have it, so that if they did have it, we could isolate, and if they didn't have it, then they weren't themselves isolated. So I think it was just a matter of the actual supply of the testing kits. Now, I'll say in the same breath that the emergency assistance that we've passed, that I've already spoken of on this call, billions of that money was devoted to ramping up widespread testing as soon as possible. So it's not lost on us that is necessary. And the final thing I'll say is that one of the areas that we had to urge the administration to step up to the plate a little bit more on was the Defense Production Act, which is a federal law been around for 75 years at this point, dates back to the time of the Korean War, that basically allows for the mobilization of the private industrial capability of our country to be directed towards a national emergency. And so, in other words, that we would be able to direct an industrial manufacturer to ramp up that manufacturer's production of rapid testing kits, even though perhaps that manufacturer wouldn't have made that decision in the normal course, but the government said, no, you've got to do it. This is a national crisis. I believe in the invocation of the National Defense Act in this emergency, and that has been invoked for the production of rapid testing kits. So I'm hoping that your goal will be, and our mutual goal will be realized in a very short period of time, because I do agree that's one of the principal stools upon which we have to rest the ability to open up safely.
Thank you, Congressman. Next on the line, we'll have Rhonda from Honolulu. She has a question about education. Rhonda, you're live.
Hi, thank you for taking my call, and I do want to give a good shout out to our local government and the support that you were able to provide to them. And I appreciate you reminding people that they can reach out and you will help them. I had so many people surprised when they heard that I was able to get through and get help. So thanks. But my question is about my EL students. I'm teaching and I want to be able to support them during this time, and they're just out there. Some of them are homeless, some of them have no access to technology, and I know the department is doing everything they can to try to help. I just wondered if you had heard anything at the federal level, and also many of my families are homeless. If I do get in touch with somebody, they want to know how to get their stimulus money. Is there any process in place for our unsheltered populations who are as entitled to these funds as anyone else to get a pathway to being to getting their stimulus checks?
Well, first of all, on our unsheltered, you're entirely correct that that's been a very difficult population to reach for the stimulus checks. And the best answer I have on that is that many of our nonprofit organizations that are, dedicated to that population are very aware of the difficulty from a stimulus check payment, and they're very cognizant of what needs to be done to contact them and to get an accurate address to which the economic stimulus payments can be made. So I think that continues to be a work in progress. In all honesty, it has been probably the most difficult population to reach adequately, and so we've all been dedicated to try to. Because you're entirely right, they're as entitled to anybody to receive the stimulus. In terms of education, another major source of federal assistance in the CARES Act and after that, a lot of the education money has gone to state and local education departments for the specific goal of facilitating distance learning, virtual learning. The State Department of Education here has received somewhere in the range of $40 million from that perspective. Of course, you know better than I do from your question, from the indication from your question, is that there are a huge number of folks out there who do not have access to the basic equipment or basic capability or even connectivity to be able to train. Excuse me, just a second. I was just telling my staff to extend for a little while after 8 o'clock, just because we started late, and there's evidently some more questions in the queue, so we'll go past 8. I think that by some estimates, 10 to 15%, maybe even as high as 20%, just have a great level of difficulty in even accessing education virtually in any way, shape, or form, especially the more remote parts of our state and those parts that do not have connectivity. And of course, also some of our lower income populations just don't have the resources to be able to, get satisfactory access to technology to be able to do that. A lot of the money has been devoted to some pretty imaginative stuff along those lines. For example, in those parts of our state and country that don't have basic broadband, and we do have those parts of our state, to have hotspots going around. So, for example, an inactive school bus, put a mobile hotspot in there, and folks come in and sit next to the hotspot in their cars and do distance learning. So that's an imaginative way to do that. But we're all trying to, especially in the education field, figure out how do we effectively continue to deliver quality education to all folks that deserve to be educated well in a COVID-19 world, and to do it on a absolute accelerated timetable.